Hey guys, what's going on? It's Kryz. In this video we're gonna look at how to make our items stack when we drag and drop them. Because right now, if we drag two item stacks that are not yet full on top of each other, they will just swap. To do this, we obviously need to change our drop method in the character script. Right now, the code that we have here only allows us to swap items between the slots. But now we want to allow it to also stack items. First, we need to check if we can add any stacks of the item in the drag item slot into the drop item slot. If this is possible, we no longer want to swap items. After that, we need to add stacks until the drop item slot is full, and then remove the same number of stacks from the dragged item slot. To check if we can add stacks, we already have that code in the item container class. It's this section here of the if statement, and now that we want to reuse this portion of the code, let's not copy and paste it, let's make a method instead. So this is the code that we originally had, but now it's inside a function of the base item slot. But to make this more versatile, let's also receive as an input parameter the amount of stacks that we want to add. And then we'll change the second portion of this statement to add the number of stacks that we currently have with the number of stacks that we want to add, and checking if it's still less than or equal to the maximum. But to make this easier to use, and since I'm assuming that the most common use case is to check if we can add just one extra stack, we'll give the amount variable a default value of 1. We also need to check if the item inside the slot is not null to avoid null reference exceptions. And this is the code that we want for item slots in the inventory. But the base item slot class is used in other places too, such as the crafting window. And for crafting recipes, we may want a recipe that requires more items than we can fit in a single slot. So we can't check for item maximum stacks in here. We need to move this into the item slot class only. We can easily do this by overriding the method in the item slot class and evaluating this condition in addition to the return value of the base version of the method. And now we just need to call this method in the two places that we were needing to use it. And now we need to add stacks until the drop item slot is full. If both stacks combined still don't go over the maximum number of stacks that this item can have, then we can add the entire stack. Otherwise, we will only be able to add as much items as the drop item slot can fit. We figure out how many stacks we can still add to this slot, and then we compare it to the number of stacks in the drag item slot, and we choose the smallest of the two. Then we add this amount of stacks to the drop item slot, and we remove the same amount from the drag item slot. But this code isn't enough. As we've seen in the remove methods of the item container class, we also need to check if the amount is 0, and if so, we need to set the item in that slot to null. And since this code is being used quite a lot, I'm actually going to move it into the setter of the amount property. And now that we're here, I have realized that we have a bug. Because we just said moments ago that in the base item slot class, we shouldn't be checking if an item has gone beyond its maximum stacks. So let's just remove this piece of code here. Back in the character script, the drop function is now doing two completely different pieces of functionality. We should definitely consider splitting this up into several methods. It's pretty clear that the first if statement is adding stacks, while the second is just swapping items. So let's make both of them into their own separate functions. Let's select the contents of the first if statement, and using Visual Studio's options, we'll click Extract Method, and then we'll just need to give it a name. I'm going to call it simply add stacks. And for the second if statement, we'll do exactly the same. Select all of the contents, click the button on the left side of the screen near the line numberings, and then select Extract Method. Here I'm going to call it simply Swap Items. So that's it. We should now be able to stack items by dragging and dropping them. Let's quickly test this in play mode before we go. We can see that we can now drag the item with 4 stacks on top of the item with 3, and they will stack to form a 7 stack item.